Hi guys, welcome to Book Time. My name is Julia. For once, I'm sitting in the place where I used to film videos all the time. Baby sneeze in the background, don't know if you heard that. And today I'm going to be doing a wrap up of the Readings Prize shortlist. The shortlist, what's the prize ever called? The Readings Prize for New Australian Fiction shortlist 2019. I've read 3 of the books, so I'm going to be talking about the first 3, and I'm currently reading the second 3. I'm reading them, I've got them here, I'm reading them along with Jacqueline Simon and Natalie, which is proving to be a very fun experience, and definitely, because I find I try to read shortlist sometimes and I get through, like say there's 6 books on the shortlist, I might get through 3 or 4 and then I sort of peter out. But this is good, it's keeping me, the buddy reading's keeping me on track. I've done another video where I outline all the shortlisted books, so I'll link that down below. Baby sneeze, baby sneeze. And in this one, I will be reviewing them properly. So the first one is a bit shiny, Superior Spectre by Angela Meyer, which is out through Ventura Press. So this one, yeah, pretty strange story. It is set in the future. It follows a man called Jeff who is dying of some unnamed disease, and he leaves Australia and his wife goes to Scotland to access an illegal type of technology through which he can access the mind of someone from the past. And the mind he happens to be able to inhabit is the mind of a young woman. She's probably in her early 20s, I guess, maybe younger, I can't remember, in 19th century Scotland. It alternates viewpoints from his perspective in the present and then her perspective in the 19th century, but then in the present or the present future, Jeff will comment on what he observed in the past, and she is also feeling the effects of his presence in her mind. So I'm guessing he's like the Spectre, but in some ways she's the Spectre in his mind too. It's a really cool idea, and there's a whole lot of themes going on around like predatory, like predation between men and women, older men and women, and power, because he's obviously an older man using and abusing her mind to make himself feel better about dying, like a literal form of escapism. He is also literally presented as a predator. He's attracted to young men, and that's something he struggles with. He has a great deal of shame about it. So yeah, that's another theme, I guess, is him working through his shame around his sexual desires. And then there's also these ideas like the power dynamics between the past and the present, and how we consume like particular ideas around the past. There's also a lot of themes around sexuality. So Jeff is obviously working through a lot of ideas around his sexuality. So he's got a really big focus on, I suppose a lot of his thoughts are tied up with sex, because the shame around that is very consuming. And then Leonora, the girl from the past, she is a very, has all these sexual desires, but lives in a society where she doesn't get to express them. And so there's a lot of work around that too. But what you don't know is whether Jeff's obsession with sex is influencing her obsession with sex. Anyway, it's a cool idea. The execution of it I found not always successful. So I found the writing sentence by sentence was normally fine. It was easy to read. It was quick. I just had to put the book down because I'm actually getting RSI in this hand, probably from like holding my baby and doing things around the house with this hand all the time, including watching YouTube. So I just felt like the plot wasn't particularly tight. Like there was so many things packed into it that I felt like I didn't get a chance to explore them all adequately. And then, so all those themes that I just mentioned were really interesting, but there were so many of them, like shame and power dynamics, past and present, male and female, young and old, like older man, younger man, husband, wife, so much going on. And then also all the power dynamics within 19th century society in Scotland, it was a lot to try and fit into one novel, I felt. And also I just didn't quite get what the purpose of it was, apart from the fact it was sort of this cool, freaky idea that you might be able to go back in time and inhabit someone's mind. I wasn't sure where it was going or what it was trying to say. Not that I feel like novels need to say something, because obviously they can be a great place for opening up ideas and opening up discussions and just exposing, new points of departure for new ways of thinking about things and stuff. But there was this thing where Leonora thought she was clear she was imagining the future or seeing the future in some way because Jeff was in her mind. And there were these cool remarks in the narrative around, maybe the future is written by mad women. And I was like, that's such a cool idea. But it's a shame that the future that she's envisaging is actually because there's this awful, selfish predator inhabiting her mind. And so is that the future she's envisioned? Is that this future that she's envisaging? Is that the power of the man? Yeah, it was a bit unclear for me. So I didn't love it. I also felt like some of the tech side of things and the speculative elements may not have been developed enough. I got the impression that the author may have been trying to keep them quite subtle and underwritten to give readers the chance to sort of imagine this future world themselves, but sometimes I felt like it was almost a bit too underdone. I just wanted a little bit more, a few little key details to help me visualize what was happening. Also, because Jeff went to Scotland, that was cool, but it was unclear why he really needed to go to Scotland. It felt a little bit like the author just wanted to write a bit about Scotland, and so there was sort of strategic, like it mentions Highland cows and whiskey and sort of other key, stereotypical Scottish things. But other than that, I didn't feel the sense of place contributed to the story so much that it needed to be such a big deal needed to be made of the fact that he ran away to Scotland. Anyway, I sound like I'm being very critical. I did, I read this whole book. I read through it quite quickly. It's not a difficult read stylistically. It is a difficult read in the sense that some of the content is quite unpleasant because it's an unpleasant character. But I do think a lot of people would like it, and I think the ideas in it, and we sort of agreed with this in the buddy read, even though some of the ideas may not be that well fleshed out, they are fleshed out. They are very interesting. So, I've talked for 10 minutes now about this one book. I'm definitely going to edit that down in the final version. The second one I read was Inappropriation by Lexi Fryman, out through Allen and Unwin. Basically, I would say this is a satirization. Is that a word? Okay. The baby's crying. I'll be back. Hopefully not in 12 days like last time. So I was talking about, I don't even know where my copy of the book's gone, but Inappropriation, Lexi Freiman. It's a satire of identity politics, and I feel like it's also a satire / critique of the way the author's view that the political left takes themselves too seriously and is unable to take a joke and fails to see the usefulness of humour when working through trauma. That would be my overall reading of the thematic premise of the text. It's so the way it explores that idea is through a coming-of-age story about a girl called Ziggy who attends a very elite, wealthy girls' private school in Sydney. And she is Jewish. She feels very outcast. She's working through her own sexuality. She doesn't know if she's bisexual or gay or any number of labels that she comes across when she's trying to research forms of sexuality to work out something that might describe how she's feeling. She does make a couple of feminist friends who consider themselves radical feminists and base all their ideas on Donna Haraway's essay about cyborgs from the 1980s. And so the way, on the one hand, this story is it's a tale of her making these friends, and then the friends fall out, and then she, Ziggy, the main character, learns some things about herself, and while she doesn't come to a total resolution, there's some sense of, growth over the course of the novel. The way the satire comes into it is through a couple of ways. I would say, firstly, there's this sense through Ziggy that she is trying to work through some sort of inherited Holocaust trauma. So, because she's a Jew and her grandma was a prisoner of the Nazis, and there are some really intense Holocaust jokes in there, like not just like one-liner jokes or set-up jokes, but you know, the whole narrative. Ziggy has all these sexual fantasies about the Hitler Youth and the SS interviewing her, and it's pretty intense. I didn't find it funny. I found it upsetting, and I actually didn't know what to make of it. And I don't know whether that's because I'm not part of the Jewish community and maybe it's speaking to a cultural aspect of being Jewish that I don't understand. That's entirely possible. If you are Jewish and watching this or have read the book, let me know your thoughts on it. And yeah, that was pretty full on, like some intense Holocaust jokes. The other main one that upset me was there was this whole scenario towards the end of the novel. I won't go into the details because I don't want to spoil it, but basically it's kind of a scenario where they pretend to date rape some guys to teach them a lesson. And to me, I'm like, it's not. And I understand it's satire, but the whole, I just can't get over using the Holocaust and date rape as humorous. I can't. And I feel like what she's trying to do is in those instances is talk about the power of humor and laughter in diffusing trauma, and maybe not helping people overcome it, but move through it and live with it. So that idea in itself is really interesting and something that obviously, you know, a lot of scholars and academics have worked through that idea over the last many hundreds of years. Well, particularly in the 20th century. But yeah, the way it was done, I found, was not for me. If you like really provocative satire, you would probably like it though. The other thing the book did was definitely satirize identity politics, and it did that through the way these private schoolgirls were so obsessed with this feminist text, but misunderstood it and misrepresented it all the time, to the point where they were trying to be so inclusive and politically correct that they just came across as incredibly sexist, racist, classist, and offensive, which was okay. I felt like that element of the book did demonstrate that, you know, understanding these texts is hard, and it's hard to live ethically, but the main point was kind of that these girls were just really self-absorbed. The thing that I found probably the most productive in the book was this idea that trying to reconcile your lived experience with all these different theories about gender, or not just gender and sexuality, but being a human. So it's hard to fit your experience into one of these many narratives that are circulating, and that's sort of what Ziggy, the main character, is trying to do. So there's a lot going on in this book, and some of it worked and a lot of it didn't for me, but I think if you like provocative satire, this may be a book that you find productive in some way. Stylistically, I would say the first half is a little overwrought. It's really intense, this sort of claustrophobic, overwritten style, which was supposed to be, I think, really outrageous and vibrant, but it ended up being a little, I feel like it wasn't quite well executed enough. And so it distracted me from the actual story. But during the second half of the book, I felt like the writer really got into her stride, and the prose was still kind of outrageous and fiery, but more relaxed and had a better flow. So it was an interesting book. I don't regret reading it. I found it tough. But a lot of other people have given it 5 stars, so I feel like it's on this shortlist, so it's obviously a powerful book, and I think props to Lexi Fryman for writing something quite different and quite provocative, and for Allen and Unwin to publishing it. The third one I read, I just finished it yesterday, and it was a 5-star read for me, was A Constant Hum by Alice Bishop, with an absolutely stunning cover. A Constant Hum, well, where do I start? It is a series of short stories and flash fiction, so fiction that's sometimes one sentence, a paragraph, a couple of pages, sometimes proper length full short stories that focus on the Black Saturday bushfires, which were a series of bushfires that occurred in Australia over 10 years ago now. And were really bad, and several hundred people died, many homes were burned, entire towns razed to the ground, and the state is still recovering, I would say. Anyway, this set of short stories, it had got a lot of really good reviews, so I was like, okay, this is going to be mind-blowing, it's going to be devastating, and it was, but not in the way I thought it was going to be. I think I thought it was going to like bang, 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 like relentlessly hit me hard, every single story, but it didn't quite work like that. I would say instead that all these little snippets and little pictures of people's lives accumulated over the course of the text, so that by the end you have all these rich layers of experience and perspectives and like humanity that are tied up together really well. So by the end I was so sad. I was overwhelmingly sad. It was a very profound ending about loss and survival and how to keep living and functioning in a world where you've lost so much. It was really good. I cried a lot. All my buddies did, I think. All my reading buddies. So, yeah. And I feel like this short story collection works really well as a collection. Like some short story collections, you can go back and just read particular stories that stood out to you because they stand alone. I feel like this collection doesn't work like that. There are a few stories that stand out in my head as being particularly powerful as I read them, but I would say on the whole, the power of it works in the body of work, because it is this building up. So for example, you have all sorts of perspectives. There are people who've moved back to their house after the fires but have lost their family, or there are people who have lost everyone, all their family and their home. There are people who have moved back, like it might be the perspective from their new house. There's this one story where they're clearing all the regrowth from their block, and even though they're clearing it, it just keeps growing back and back and back, and there's this sense that like you'll never be able to, like even though the fire is over and they're clearing and rebuilding, like the force of nature is just unstoppable, basically. There are stories from children's perspectives about it, and I should say that not all the stories are focused directly on the fire. Like they're not all necessarily explicitly about fires and things burning. They're just about people's lives, and like one woman who's getting sexually harassed by her boss after the fires. And I just got this sense reading that story. I was like, oh man, that's just so crap that, you know, people have to deal with the tragedy of these fires, and the way that would shape your life, and all the normal crap that comes along with life, like trying to hold down a job, trying not to get sexually harassed by your boss, which shouldn't be a normal part of life, but is for a lot of women. There was a story about a woman who managed to save her baby. She and her baby escaped and went to her sister's house, but what her sister was most worried about was the fact that she'd loaned them her DVD player and that had burned in the fire. You know, just all the things that keep going, like the normal worries and like bickering with your siblings and stuff that continues. And I should mention that the author, she lost her home, well, her family's home was lost in the fire. So she is coming, even though she acknowledges she didn't lose any people, like family members, so she's not living with that pain. She did lose a house, so you know, a lot of it feels very realistic. I should say also that it wasn't entirely without hope. There was a lot of hopefulness in the stories, in the little interactions, in unexpected positive outcomes that might have come out of the fire, like this one woman who is able to escape an abusive relationship. Yeah, it was good. It was good. I recommend it. Whether you live in Australia or not, I think you would enjoy it. So those are my thoughts on the first 3 books from the Reading Prize. We are currently reading the next 3, and I'll do another wrap up then. So I'm going to go look after this guy before he loses it, and I'll check in soon. Bye.